Shalom, children. Last lesson we learned about a boy named Joseph, who was sold by his brothers to be a slave in Mitzrayim. Yahweh was with him and protected him. Joseph was promoted to a high position in Potiphar's house. Although Joseph did not do anything wrong, he was sent to jail. Even then, Yahweh was with him, and he was promoted to jailer's helper. It was here that Joseph interpreted the two dreams of the cupbearer and the baker, and asked the cupbearer to make sure to tell Pharaoh that he didn't belong in jail. One night, Pharaoh had a dream. In it, he was standing by the river, and 7 fat cows came out and were eating. Then 7 skinny cows came out and were standing next to the fat cows, when suddenly the skinny cows ate the fat cows. Wow, that was scary, and Pharaoh woke up and glad he was just dreaming. But then, when he went back to sleep, he had a different dream. A stalk of grain popped out of the ground with 7 fat heads. Then out popped 7 skinny heads, and they ate the fat heads. Poor Pharaoh, he did not have a good night, and he was not happy the next morning. Pharaoh called all the people that worked for him to tell him what his weird dreams meant. But no one knew. Then the cupbearer remembered Joseph telling him what his dream meant. Pharaoh called for Joseph, so Joseph got all cleaned up and came in before Pharaoh. Pharaoh asked him if he could tell him what his dream meant. Joseph told Pharaoh that it was Yahweh who would give the interpretation. Pharaoh told Joseph the details of both dreams, and Joseph explained that Yahweh was sending Pharaoh a warning that for 7 years there would be lots of food to eat. But then there would be 7 years when there would not be any food growing, and it would be very difficult for everyone. Well, Joseph not only knew what the dreams meant, but he also had a good idea of how to organize everything so that the people would not go hungry in the 7 bad years. He explained they could put one of every 5 things they grew into storage houses. Pharaoh was very happy with this idea, and he thought Joseph was the smartest person in the land. He promoted Joseph to be in charge of everything. Pharaoh gave Joseph his seal ring so that everyone would know that Joseph was in charge. But that's not all. Pharaoh gave Joseph some new clothes. He also gave him a gold necklace. He also gave him a wife and a very special chariot and horse to ride. Joseph took his job very seriously, and he made sure that all the food that was needed was collected into those special houses. He did this for 7 years, and then the bad years came. People from all over Mitzrayim and even other areas came to buy grain from Joseph, because he was the only one that had reserved some food. During the first 7 years, Joseph had 2 sons. One was named Manasseh, and the other one was Ephraim. Then the 7 bad years came, and soon Joseph had to open up all the storehouses, as people came from all over because they were so hungry. In the land of Canaan, everyone was getting thinner and weaker. Jacob had heard that there was grain in Mitzrayim, so he gathered his sons together. He kept Benjamin at home, but sent the other 10 brothers to Mitzrayim with donkeys and silver to buy the grain. As the brothers stood in line to buy grain from the governor of Mitzrayim, Joseph looked up and couldn't believe his eyes. As they got closer to him, they all bowed down before him with their faces to the ground to show him respect. Joseph remembered the dream he had had many years earlier about the 10 sheaves bowing down to his sheaf. Joseph was now 30 years old, a fully grown man wearing expensive royal clothing. Not only that, but Joseph had learned to speak perfectly the language of Mitzrayim. So his brothers didn't recognize him. But in his heart, he was very different from the Mitzrites. Can you guess why? Yes, Joseph bowed down only to Yahweh, trusting in the Elohim of his fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He refused to serve any of the false gods of Mitzrayim. Joseph tested the brothers. "You are spies," he shouted. "No," cried the brothers in response. "We are all sons of one man and honest people." But Joseph kept on accusing them and questioning them about their home and family. By now the brothers were shaking with fear. They told him that they were 12 sons of their father Jacob, but one had died, and the youngest had stayed home with their father. Still, Joseph pretended not to believe them. "No, but you are spies," he said. "Now let me ask you something. When you've been bad or disobedient, does your mother ever make you go to your room or sit in a corner so you can think about it and decide not to do it again?" Well, that's exactly what Joseph did with his brothers. He shut them all up in prison for 3 days so they could think about it. And maybe Joseph also needed a couple of days to find out what his heavenly Father wished him to do. He knew that Yahweh is a merciful Elohim, ready to forgive anyone who is truly sorry for their sins. So he needed some way to test them, to see if their hearts had changed. On the 3rd day, the governor came to let them out. Joseph spoke with them sternly, saying if they did not return with their youngest brother, they would all die. The frightened brothers huddled together and talked about how guilty they felt about the evil things they had done to their younger brother Joseph. After hearing them confess their guilt, tears came to Joseph's eyes. He had to step away and secretly cry. When he returned, he singled out Shimon, had him tied up and thrown back in prison. Joseph said, "If you don't bring back your youngest brother next time, your life is worth nothing." Then he filled their sacks with grain and sent them on their way. When the 9 sons arrived home, they told their father Jacob everything. "Look what you've done," he moaned. "Joseph is gone, and now Shimon is gone. And on top of that, you want me to send Benjamin back with you and make me lose him too. If I let him go down there and something bad happens to him, I will just lay myself down and die." Well, time went by, and all of them, including their animals, had nearly eaten up all the grain from Mitzrayim. Soon they would have to go back there and get some more. Jacob's sons tried to convince him to please let Benjamin go with them. So at last Jacob gave in and agreed to let Benjamin go with them. He sent his sons with some dried fruit, along with some little honey, some spices and some almonds. Last of all, he hugged his son. There was nothing Jacob could do but wait and pray that Yahweh would change the governor's heart so that all his sons could return safely. When the brothers arrived, they were frightened, but Joseph had a great feast prepared for them. Then he brought Shimon out to them, looking healthy and very happy to see his brothers. Joseph asked how their father was doing, if he was still alive. The brothers told him that he was in good health. Joseph turned around and ran out of the room. It was just too much for him. He went to his room, cried out all his tears. he washed his face and came back with a command for the servants to serve the food. As their meal was being served, the sons of Jacob began to notice something very strange. They had been seated in the exact order of their birth. How on earth could the man have known? Reuben, the oldest, was served first, then Shimon, the second-born, then Levi, then Judah, and on down the line. Benjamin was the youngest and seated at the end. He was served 5 times as much of the delicious food than any of the others. To get 5 times more was a great honor. Benjamin must have been absolutely stuffed. Did you see how differently Joseph treated his brothers on their second visit? He was no longer angry, but had decided to forgive them and be kind, no matter what they had done to him. He wanted to do things Yahweh's way. Well, children, that is the end of our story for this week. So we will see you next time for another exciting Torah portion. Shalom.